Hi, everybody. I'm Stephanie Christensen. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Science and Innovation Center, and welcome to Sustaining a Research Career in the Peri-Pandemic Era, Funding Networking Guidance for the Early Career Professional. And just as a reminder, this is being recorded, and participants are currently being muted and your videos are not on. So if you would like to communicate or ask any questions, please put it in the chat and the moderators will try to work in your questions and comments. And I just wanted to give you a little orientation to where you are, which is the Science and Innovation Center. And usually during the meeting, we have our own center where we host seminars as well as the PhD reception and an award ceremony for rising stars. But here we're doing this via Zoom, but really the Science and Innovation Center is a venue for researchers to network and learn more about research-related resources and innovative science. So we host seminars such as the one here where we're doing career development for research-based fields, so both in academia, and we had one earlier this year, or earlier in the conference on industry. We also host seminars on innovative science and scientific methods, so 101s on upcoming methods. And we do host webinars throughout the year as well. In fact, we have several webinars on our website that you can check out on all these topics, and we should have more coming throughout the year. So I'm really excited for a hopefully very integrative session with a lot of communication. And I'll just introduce you to your moderators today. So that includes Sana Siddiqui, PhD, who actually did a postdoc with me in my group at UCSF and is now at Lake Pharma. Luke Donovan from University of Washington, and Rachel Cohn from University of Pennsylvania. So take it away, please.
Hi, everyone. So thank you, Stephanie, for the introduction. That's right. So I'm a scientific manager at Lake Pharma. So it's a biologics company that's gone involved in the vaccine realm since the pandemic started last year. And my academic journey started at McGill with a PhD with a focus on basic asthma research. So I am, Canadian in the US. And I moved to the NIH for a 2-year postdoc in aging, and then moved to UCSF for revisiting asthma, but basic translational work, and then landed in biopharma, biotech. So I'm glad to be here and looking forward to the session. And welcome.
Hi, everybody. My name is Rachel Cohn. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Pennsylvania. I'm a physician in pulmonology and critical care. I'm currently funded on a K-23, wrapping up my second year from NHLBI. And my research is at the intersection of health services research and healthcare operations, thinking about novel healthcare delivery models and how we make care more efficient and improve patient outcomes.
My name is Luke Donovan. I'm an assistant professor over at the University of Washington, based primarily at the VA, where I practice in pulmonary critical care and sleep, and my currently supported by a VA Career Development Award from Health Services Research and Development. My research is primarily focused on how to improve access to sleep care in ways that maximize value and efficiency. I am going to just give you all a quick overview for the session here. We have mixed modalities. First, we're going to start off with 2 speakers, and then we're going to transition into a panel discussion. So first, you're going to hear from Dr. Colin Terry, as well as Dr. Kundal. Then we're going to have a panel discussion primarily aimed at Drs. Bartlett, Shepard, and Rowe. And then we'll move into more of a panel discussion, but also in this panel discussion, our 2 speakers are more than happy and more than welcome to participate. So just a quick reminder, you are all going to be muted from your microphones as well as the cameras. So if you have questions, please put them into the chat, and we will be monitoring the chat, and we'll ping either the speakers or the panelists with any questions that you have. So without further ado, I'd first like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Colin Terry. She's the Program Director for Training, Career Development, and Loan Repayment for the Division of Lung Diseases within the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute. In this role, she provides guidance to potential and current awardees around the research priorities and opportunities available for early career professionals. She's also heavily involved in the drafting and funding opportunity announcements, as well as requests for applications. She's served as the program director since 2018, and therefore she has a rich opportunity spanning both the pre and the peri-pandemic era. She's going to discuss ways in which the NIH is working to adapt early career funding mechanisms during this pandemic. So Dr. Colin Terry, take it away.
All right. Great. Thank you so much for the introduction, Luke. And I'm very happy to be here to talk to you all about basically what NIH has been trying to do to accommodate the struggles that we all know that you've been having throughout the COVID-19 pandemic and beyond. And so firstly, I just want to say that, at NIH, we've been doing our best to try to monitor the situation, pay attention to what's going on, hear your voices, and really, do everything that we can to make sure that we're responding to what we hear. And so you can see here a couple publications that came out on NIH's website from the Open Mic blog from Mike Lauer, who's the director for extramural research at NIH, on the impact of COVID-19 from last year on the biomedical research workforce. And then also NIH did a couple surveys that we sent out to many of our grantees to kind of check in and see what are the major issues and concerns that is facing our grantee community. And so really, on the right, what we see is that postdocs and early career faculty are the ones most concerned about the negative impact that COVID is going to have on their career stage. And so we hear you loud and clear. We're aware of this, and we're going to continue to work with you all through this to make sure that you can have stable research careers in the future, because the last thing we want to do is lose you at such a pivotal point in your transition to independence. So with that being said, NIH has put out quite a number of flexibilities, and at the beginning of the pandemic, the phrase maximum flexibility was being used quite a lot as we navigated what was going on with all our grantees and institutions shutting down and all of that. So many of these things might not be so relevant anymore because we're not quite in the same crisis mode with institutions in full shutdown, and people needing to suddenly and urgently go to the ICU for long clinical stints, although who knows what may happen. And so these programs and flexibilities are still in place, and so I'm just going to go over all of them for your awareness. So the first is that for institutional NRSAs such as T32s and T35s, while people were shut down or fully clinical, stipends could continue to be charged to these programs. And they just kind of needed to let NIH know what was going on, but there wasn't really an approval process. This is still in place. Importantly, for postdocs who have NRSA payback agreements, if you had to make any changes to your research commitments, you can get an additional year extension for those payback agreements to try to get the research time in later so that you don't incur payback if that's an issue that you're facing now. We're also at NHLBI allowing for extensions to NRSA limits for trainees. So these are just done by a waiver request, and potential carryover of funds from unfilled slots, because we recognize that not all programs could fill the slots due to everything that was going on. For our T35 programs, which tend to be short-term summer programs, a lot of them either had to cancel, shift to virtual programs, or change their length. And so these, we were very, again, flexible with anything that they wanted to do that they felt fit best with their program. And that's still somewhat ongoing with this summer, particularly with a lot of programs still in full virtual mode. And we also allowed this for short-term slots on T32s, which some of them have. A lot of the items on this slide are the same as the last slide, but this is for individual NRSAs, so your F30s, F31s, F32s. So in this case, again, stipends continue to be charged, extensions for payback agreements are in place, the extensions for NRSA limits are in place, but importantly for NHLBI, we added in that you can actually get a funded extension on your F-type award if needed. You can submit that request. This is for a maximum of 6 months, and you can actually send that in through the supplement funding announcement, and you can talk to your program officer and grant specialist about it if you have an F-type award and you're considering this. And this is one option for you to get a little bit more time on your award if you feel like you need it before transitioning on to a K or other grant. For K-type awards, I'm mainly going to focus on this slide about K99s, and then I'll get to the other Ks in a minute. So firstly, and importantly, we are allowing for extensions for K99 eligibility. This is across NIH. So we have a 2 receipt cycle extension going through the October and November 2021 due dates. So essentially, for example, if your eligibility for the K99, which is 4 years of postdoctoral experience, ends in June or July of 2020, you could then instead, because of this extension, be able to apply in the October, November, or February, March cycle. So this is a really great opportunity to be able to submit. I think a lot of people who normally wouldn't have been able to resubmit their K99s are able to do that. And given how competitive this mechanism is, that's a fantastic chance there. So if you're thinking about applying for a K99, I highly suggest looking into it. And then also for our K99 awardees at NHLBI, one of the things that we've been doing is to allow them to have extensions as well before transitioning to the R00, because we recognize that a lot of institutions implemented hiring freezes in the middle of COVID, and so it just wasn't possible for them to move on to their next position. Some of them even had positions lined up, but just couldn't make the move yet. And so we worked with each of them individually to work out these funded extensions for them. And if it looks like anything like that's going to continue to be the case, we're going to keep working with our K99s on an as-need basis for those. And then finally, we allowed for reduction in effort requirements due to COVID-19 clinical duties. So we allowed for leave of absence and breaks in service and just reduced effort in general. We really didn't expect everybody to send in some formalized requests. And I just want to say to all of our K awardees, don't worry too much about your RPPRs. I know a lot of my grantees have been really concerned that they're going to get in trouble because they had all this extra clinical time, and that's not the case. Again, maximum flexibility. We recognize that you had a moral and ethical obligation to help treat these patients, given your backgrounds in pulmonary and critical care. And so you did what you needed to do. You helped save lives, and we're not going to fault you for that. And I also just want to mention that, not COVID related policies, no cost extensions are always an option. So NIH rarely ever has to give prior approval for your first no cost extension. Usually you can just put it into the system as long as your grant's still active, and then you can keep working on your grant. And nothing is really needed on our end. So that's, if you have leftover funds because you couldn't work on your grant, this is a great opportunity to continue to extend that so that you can get R01 ready. And NHLBI also has our R03 program to help bridge K01, K08, and K23 awardees onto their first R01 if things didn't go quite right in your K and you're not R01 ready yet. So that's another option there. Oh, the other thing I forgot to mention is that almost all of this information is listed on the NIH COVID-19 FAQ page. It's very extensive. It covers lots of information on training grants and also just all of our grants in general as to what flexibility policies are out there. A few of these things that I've mentioned that are NHLBI specific, you might need to reach out to your program officer, or we have separate notices out on. Which I'm happy to, if these slides get shared, I have the links at the bottom so that you can easily access them. The next thing that I wanted to talk about is our K extension program for K01, K08, K23, and K25 awardees. So we released a notice a couple months ago that we're allowing our K grantees in the last year of their award or their first no-cost extension to apply for a funded extension for salary support. For those who had shutdowns at their institution for 12 or more weeks, we're allowing a 4-month extension in salary support. And for those who had additional clinical duties on top of those shutdowns, we're allowing an additional 2 months of support for a total of 6 months of salary support. This can also, shutdowns and interruptions could also include human subjects restrictions and not full shutdowns. The application components we try to keep very minimal. So a letter from your institution certifying lab closures, clinical research restrictions, or other clinical duties. And the letter should also commit to continue to support to you as a grantee, at whatever level of effort you had on the grant before. At the very least, if they can offer you more, that's always great. A brief description of additional COVID-19 related disruptions from the grantee. So this is an opportunity to also talk about, if you had additional childcare issues or anything like that. A brief description of research to be completed during the extension, mainly because we just want to make sure that your work is remaining in scope of what was originally proposed. And it can even be just doing the work that you proposed in the grant that you didn't get to do because COVID was just totally derailed you. A budget, and then an other support page detailing any other grants you have. And just a note that you need to specify the NIH notice associated with this extension program, not the NHLBI notice. This is the only way that we can consider your extension request for funding due to silly bureaucratic rules. And then finally, the last thing I wanted to mention is flexibilities for early stage investigators. So if you have your ESI status and you're worried that you're going to lose it because of COVID, you can submit an ESI extension request through ERA Commons by using the public health emergency option. There's a NIH-wide committee that reviews these requests on a regular basis. So you justify how long your extension is by, how much your research has been disrupted. And we suggest that you submit the request once you know exactly how much research time was lost. And we recognize that many places are still at, partial capacity and things like that. So until you get the full extent, we suggest that you hold off on submitting. But if your ESI status is about to run out, we go ahead and submit so that you can get in your extension sooner rather than later. And then you can submit another extension request once the full loss is known. So I think that's it for me. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much. So while we're waiting for some questions to percolate from the chat, I just had a quick one. Let's say you're a trainee or an early career investigator interested in pursuing flexibility in your grant. What should your first move be?
Contact your program officer. Always the best thing to do when in doubt, contact your program officer. And we're happy to work with you. Like I said, NIH has been using this mantra of maximum flexibility. So even if we don't have a policy in place, we'll work with you to try to find some sort of workaround or anything that we can to help you out. The last thing we want to do is leave you in the dark without any support.
All right. Sana, anything from the chat?
Not from the chat, but there was a question actually that had come in earlier. What can lead an extension request to be unsuccessful?
Extension requests, I mean, mainly what we're looking for the Fs, I guess it's a little easier to talk about what makes them successful than unsuccessful in this case. You know, a clear timeline to what your next steps are when you plan on applying for a K, when you plan on applying for an R01, depending on which level of extension you're at, if you're at an F or a K. You know, having that clear institutional support that shows that, you know, things aren't just going to kind of fall apart as soon as this extension's done and your research career is kind of, you know, going to go get swept under the rug as you move back into clinical space. I think, yeah, and mainly just a clear plan of what you want to do, you know, and that it remains in scope of the original award. So it's definitely not as stringent as like a full-on research, you know, new application review. We're really trying to support as many people as we can with these.
Thanks, Roya. There actually is a two-part question from, I will end up slaughtering the name, so I apologize for not calling out who asked, but what is the turnaround time on an R03? So that is from submission to NOA to funding, and what are the rates on funding is the first part of their question.
Yeah, so the R03 is just like any other grant. So NIH usually takes, I would say, from the submission deadline to the day that you can start your award is probably about 10 months, maybe more, depending on when you apply in the fiscal year. So yeah, just keeping that in mind, it can take 10 to 12 months usually for an average NIH grant to get awarded.
Great, thanks.
Oh, and for the funding rates have been quite high. I would say they're probably above 60% percent, sorry.
Okay, awesome, thank you. And then there's another question. Is NHLBI planning to reinitiate the COVID supplement for Ks that was there last year, or is the plan primarily for new separate grants related to COVID-19?
I believe that's in reference to supplements specifically focused on COVID research, is what I'm assuming. We didn't have a focused program of supplements for Ks until this year, which was for those impacted by COVID. At this point, NIH has moved away from COVID supplements for the large part, and we're just having people come in through normal grant mechanisms to support their COVID-related research. I don't foresee us having another supplement program like that anytime soon, but I am not on the pulse of all COVID-related research. There's quite a lot that NIH is doing, so I could be wrong.
Great, thanks, Roya, and thanks for accepting the invitation to speak. And I'll pass it back to Luke.
Thank you very much. So now I'd like to introduce Dr. Vaishnavi Kundal. Dr. Kundal is an assistant professor in the Division of Pulmonary Critical Care and Sleep Medicine over at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai, New York. As an early career physician scientist, she is the recipient of an American Academy of Sleep Medicine Physician Scientist Training Award, where she's exploring the link between sleep apnea, sleep duration, atherosclerosis, and visceral adiposity using multimodality imaging. Additionally, she's actively involved in the ATS, where she's the co-chair of the Sleep and Respiratory Neurobiology Early Career Working Group. There, she pioneered novel methods to engage fellows and early career professionals and promote networking within the field. Over the last year, she's also been successful in virtually engaging early career professionals in the wake of the pandemic. And she's going to be discussing some of these lessons learned, as well as the process of going about it during the session today. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Kundal.
Hi, everybody. Luke, thank you for that introduction. Just want to make sure you can see the screen. Okay. Hi everyone. My talk today will be on virtual avenues to engage early career professionals in the peri-pandemic era. I have no financial disclosures. Actually just wanted to start by giving you a little bit of introduction. So Luke and I are actually co-chairs for the SRN Early Career Working Group since 2019. And we took over approximately 6 months before the pandemic hit. So most of our time has been in and around the pandemic. So in this talk, I will really be talking about our personal experience from the SRN Early Career Working Group and some of the initiatives that we've developed to continue engagement of early career folks in our assembly. So thank you for the opportunity. So just I'll briefly just go over the outline for the talk. So I'll start a little bit with the pre-pandemic activities that we had for our specific early career working group, and then some of the pandemic related obstacles that came about in engaging early career professionals. And then specifically, I'll focus on the SRN Early Career Working Group experience for overcoming some of these obstacles and creating virtual avenues for engagement. And then lastly, I will also review the several ATS-wide avenues to help us remain engaged in this virtual era. As early career chairs during the pre-pandemic time, we really remain engaged with our early career members with monthly phone conference calls. This was mainly to discuss different conference deadlines, grant deadlines, mentoring and apprenticeship programs, and really to get the input of our early career professionals for our assembly. We also our working group is a little bit newer, so we just started the apprenticeship program in our assembly about 2 years ago, where we pair the early career members with mentors in the programming and planning committee to increase involvement of ECPs in our assembly. But mainly, we really relied on the ATS conference for the in-person networking, which we did through a few ways, which is the annual working group breakfast that we had, and the assembly meeting, of course, which allows us to mingle with both peers and senior members in our assembly. Of course, we have the scientific and poster presentations that allows for the impromptu networking and collaborations. And then the ATS-wide mentor-mentee program, where mentors and mentees are matched and they meet at the ATS conference for a face-to-face meeting. So a lot of the networking that we did as an early career working group in the assembly was relying on the ATS conference. So basically, during the pandemic, there were several ECPs had increased responsibilities that were pandemic related, and this included increased clinical responsibilities, domestic and childcare responsibilities, and all of this kind of resulted in difficulty engaging trainees and junior faculty in our assembly and our early career working group. And really, again, just to highlight, because of the lack of in-person and face-to-face networking, there were fewer avenues to allow for impromptu networking that happens at the conference, fewer opportunities for external mentorship and new research collaborations, and the virtual thematic poster presentation format is not as conducive to collaborations and feedback. So the lack of in-person networking was really the kind of the downfall of the pandemic. But with every obstacle, there's a silver lining. So what was the silver lining here? So it took us an entire pandemic for us to really begin seamlessly using virtual platforms such as Zoom and BlueJeans to interact. So in fact, with these virtual platforms, there's easier accessibility to mentors from across the country on these platforms, and it allows for increased opportunities for external mentorship and collaborations. Also, we started seeing more kind of multi-institutional grand rounds, journal clubs, and seminar series that allow for increased collaborations, and then the increased use of social media to engage early career professionals. So now we'll discuss a little bit of our personal experience in the sleep assembly working group and some of the avenues that we used and to increase and maintain early career engagement over the last year. So this includes virtual happy hours, Twitter chats in collaboration with the ATS MITT, e-newsletters that we disseminated, and lots of social media use. So I'll be going through each one of these to discuss how we went on to implement them. So this was actually, the virtual happy hours was actually an idea from one of our early career professionals sometime in June of last year. So the credit goes to Miranda Tan. But really the goal was to bring together ECPs and senior leaders in our field for like an informal happy hour. And we really just wanted to make up for missed networking opportunities due to the lack of the in-person conference. So the way we did this was we would choose a theme and a specific date or time. And then we sent an email to invite about 6 to 8 senior mid-career physician scientists in the field, approximately 1 to 2 months prior to the date. So this is an example of the email we sent for our first virtual happy hour, where we picked a topic and we invited them to participate. And we had a lot of enthusiasm from senior members in our assembly to partake in this. So some of the topics were careers in sleep medicine and how to land your first academic job. And once the panelists accepted the invite, we would invite our ECPs via email. And we also heavily advertised on Twitter, which allowed for registration and RSVP. So this is a screenshot from one of our virtual happy hours that we held just a couple of months ago in spring 2021 in March. And so we generally held the happy hours. They were about 1 hour in length, and it was around 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific time. The way we kind of broke these down was we allowed 15 minutes for a short introduction for each of the invited panelists. And then we broke out into 2 breakouts. So we had 2 20-minute breakouts. Each breakout had 2 senior members and about 3 to 4 early career professionals. So we generally had about 20 to 30 early career professionals register for each of these happy hours. And the ECPs could actually request to be paired with specific panelists that they wanted to network with. So overall, we really had great feedback and enthusiasm from both early career professionals and especially the senior members in our assembly. So we tried to elicit some of their feedback after the virtual happy hours. So some of the things that they really enjoyed about these happy hours was the greater attending to early career ratio, because we had 2 panelists for every 3 to 4 early career members. They enjoyed hearing from senior faculty about career advice, and they just overall enjoyed the networking experience. We also tried to get some ideas of what they would change for future happy hours. Some of the responses that we got were maybe having more specific themes around mentoring and scientific writing, and having pre-specified questions regarding these topics to guide the discussion. So disclaimer, we're still definitely working out some kinks. Sorry about the ambulance. We're still definitely working out some kinks for the virtual happy hour, but we're definitely planning more in the summer with potential future topics, including how to get promoted in academia and submitting your first grant, where to begin. So another one of these avenues that we really delved into was the Twitter chats, which was done in partnership with the ATS MITT committee. So it was kind of a similar format in that we would pick a topic and a day and a time, and then we would invite about 6 to 8 senior or mid-career physician scientists who were ideally active on Twitter. So again, this is an example of an email that we sent out to senior members to invite them to participate in the Twitter chat. And there was definitely a lot of positive response from that side. So once the panelists RSVP'd, we would go ahead and advertise on social media and email to our early career members. And we also enlisted our panelists to help advertise the Twitter chat because many of them were really avid Twitter users. And so in programming the Twitter chat, we generally came up with 5 questions for the topic. So for example, one of our topics was pathways in sleep medicine training. So one of the questions that we came up with was, are there specific programs to support research training in sleep? And the invited panelists would then respond to the question. So in this example, we discussed the ATS Aspire Fellowship, which is a way for pulmonary and critical care trainees to get support for research training in sleep. Here are some examples of some other questions, which are what are the pathways, training pathways that can lead to a career in sleep medicine or research? And these questions really helps engage the Twitter audience and the panelists. So again, we held a couple of Twitter chats. These are the topics that they revolved around. And how did we do? So these are some of the Twitter statistics. And here you can see we had about 250,000 to 500,000 potential impressions, which is representative of every time a tweet shows up on a user's Twitter feed or timeline. So overall, you know, it was really the panelists really enjoyed the Twitter chats, and we were able to engage a lot of discussion around the topics. Another initiative that we came up with earlier this year, right after the pandemic, was the newsletters. So we decided to disseminate these newsletters, which highlighted a lot of the ATS programs, ATS-wide programs, including the apprenticeship and mentoring program, early career opportunities, grant deadlines. And we also used it to highlight a lot of our early career working group events, such as the happy hour in the Twitter chat. So we've so far disseminated about 3 newsletters for winter and spring, as well as the fall. And what we do is we disseminate it to the pulmonary and sleep program directors, which then in turn forward it to their junior faculty and trainees. And we also send an assembly-wide email. So in this way, we were really able to recruit a few trainees and junior faculty who reached out expressing their interest to be involved in our assembly. And then last, you know, we made sure that to stay engaged and advertise all the events on social media. So we tweeted about the apprenticeship program for our assembly, the mentoring program, the SRN Aspire Fellowship Grant, as well as the events that we hosted, such as the virtual happy hour. And this really helped gain a lot of applicants and traction for these programs. Also want to highlight that the ETS itself has a lot of great virtual opportunities in this kind of peri-pandemic virtual era. So I already mentioned the ETS mentoring program, which is now virtual. The deadline is actually May 24th, so there's still time to apply. I myself was part of the new faculty bootcamp for the ETS this year, which was all virtual and really had excellent lectures for junior faculty and postdocs that are really pertinent to us as early career professionals. Some of them are listed here. And then ETS Early Career also has a lot of webinar series and networking opportunities. So for example, there was the Early Career Kickoff this past Saturday that involved early career members to meet other working groups of other assemblies. And then I also want to emphasize that the hybrid in-person and remote lectures are here to stay. So take advantage of them. Look out for multi-institutional grand rounds. These are just examples of some that I ran across recently on social media. These are free to join and really an easy way to network and establish collaborations that didn't previously exist before the pandemic. And so lastly, I just want to reemphasize for all early career professionals in this pandemic era to really embrace the opportunity provided by virtual platforms. Take advantage of the wide accessibility of mentors across ETS that you have now with these virtual platforms. and create and get involved in virtual networking opportunities in your assembly and ATS wide. So thank you for inviting me to talk, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much. Great talk. So while we're waiting for some questions to percolate in from the comment section, why don't I start us off with one question? You mentioned a few networking events. What do you think were the biggest barriers to engaging early career professionals in these networking events?
Yeah, I think that I feel like one of the barriers that I've kind of found is that generally at the beginning of the academic year, we get a lot of interest from early career groups, especially after the ATS meetings. But as the academic year goes on and everybody gets busy, there's a lot of dropout from the early career members. So I think, at least in our experience, what we've found is that holding monthly Zoom meetings with the early career professionals was really helpful because it allowed them to stay engaged. And really, it allowed us to elicit their input on what they would like to see in our assembly. And so, you know, because we're really just ambassadors for our early career professionals in our assembly. So I think having that recurring monthly meetings with them helps them stay involved and stay engaged.
Excellent. Rachel, is there anything from the chat?
Nothing from the chat, but if anyone has any questions, please post them.
I guess we had one other question while we're waiting. What other networking venues are you interested in exploring?
So I think, I mean, there's definitely a wide range of possibilities for virtual networking events. You know, because we have ways to reach, you know, a lot of the senior members in our assembly across the country. I think for right now, we just got rolling on these virtual happy hours. So we're focusing on trying to really iron out the kinks there. And we've had a lot of positive feedback from the senior members. So I think we're going to keep at those. And we're definitely planning to have a couple more this summer, revolving around grant submissions and promotions. I think maybe in the future, in discussion with our assembly leadership, we're hoping to get more early career professionals involved at an earlier stage, maybe, you know, like medical training, residency, postdoctoral stage. And we look forward to reaching out and finding avenues to do this. So.
We do have one question in the chat from Dr. Vandavasi. We're curious if your efforts, particularly in this virtual age, succeeded in diversifying the involvement beyond the typical institutions. So what we've seen, she and I are both very involved in the critical care early career professionals working group, is people who are well connected tend to continue to be well connected. And so how have the virtual efforts diversified your participants?
I think that's a great question. I feel like we've been able to actually attract early career professionals from, you know, all different types of institutions. We've also been able to attract some international early career professionals. So I actually think some of the avenues that we've used in the last year has helped us diversify, you know, not just attract people from large academic institutions, but also smaller institutions. And so that allows to increase diversity in our early career working group. So I think that we've been able to kind of help bring in people from different institutions.
That's great. And I will just say there are multiple comments in the chat complimenting both you and Dr. Donovan for all of your hard work in engaging our early career folks. So thank you for that from multiple people. I think there is one more question before we move on. Interest in our specialty could start earlier in training than fellowship, are you thinking to reach out to earlier stage trainees such as med students, undergrads, to hopefully attract them to our field?
Yeah, definitely. That's something that we need to do in the sleep field, especially. We discussed this at our assembly meeting. I think we need to look into ways that we can really target trainees at an earlier stage. We haven't come up with we're definitely something that we're working on, and definitely something that's on our radar that we hope to do in the upcoming academic year.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. That was an awesome talk, great questions. And we're now going to transition the program over to our panel. So I have the privilege of introducing Dr. Susan Bartlett. Dr. Bartlett is a professor of medicine and clinical epidemiology at McGill University and senior scientist with the Center for Outcomes Research and Evaluation at McGill University Health Center. She is also an adjunct professor of medicine at Johns Hopkins Medicine. She is a clinical psychologist and behavioral epidemiologist by training. Her research focuses on how behavioral factors and emotional well-being impact patients with systemic inflammatory illness. Her current research focuses on patient engagement, understanding and measuring what matters most to patients, and enhancing treatment adherence to improve outcomes. She received the Woman of Distinction Award in 2015 from McGill University for education and has received multiple awards for her research. Dr. Bartlett currently serves as the Assembly Chair for the ATS Behavioral Science and Health Services Research Assembly, as well as on the BSHSR Board of Directors and Planning Committee.
Thank you, Rachel. Delighted to be here today.
Thanks, Rachel, for that introduction. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Dean Shepard from University of California, San Francisco. I'm actually seeing him after 3 years, albeit virtually, so it's great to see you. So Dr. Dean Shepard is a professor of medicine at UCSF. He is the chief of the Division of Pulmonary Critical Care, Allergy, and Sleep, and is a PI of the UCSF NHLBI Multidisciplinary Training Grant in pulmonary science and medicine. He is a member of the NHLBI Council and has been advocating for funding mechanisms to support early career professionals who have all been impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. Dr. Shepard has directly overseen the training of more than 50 postdoctoral fellows, including 16 K awardees, and his own research focuses on the in vivo biology of members of the integrin family, of adhesion receptors, and the cellular and molecular mechanisms underlying pulmonary fibrosis. So welcome, Dr. Dean Shepard. It's also my pleasure to introduce a fellow Canadian, Dr. Brian Rowe, so welcome. Dr. Brian Rowe is the Scientific Director of the Institute of Circulatory and Respiratory Health, so the ICRH, at the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, CIHR. And CIHR, as most of you probably know, is Canada's premier health research funding agency. He's a clinician scientist working clinically in the University of Alberta Hospital Emergency Department, and is a professor in the Department of Emergency Medicine and School of Public Health at the University of Alberta, both located in Edmonton. So go Oilers. Dr. Rowe has had a long-standing interest in evidence generation and clinical research involving therapy and diagnosis of acute cardiorespiratory conditions. And he has published 570 peer-reviewed manuscripts and 36 book chapters. In addition to maintaining a productive research program, he's also committed to building the next generation of researchers locally, nationally, and internationally. And thank you to all of the panelists and speakers for accepting our invitation. So without further ado, I'll start off with the first questions. Since the speakers have spoken and we have a better idea of their background, the first question is actually aimed at Dr. Bartlett, Dr. Shepard, and Dr. Rowe. So we'd like to ask each of you, and we can start with Susan, if you could briefly just tell us about your current research interests.
Sure. First, I'd like to thank you for putting together really this very, very informative afternoon. It's a delight to be here. I am a clinical researcher. My research program focuses on patient-centered research methods. So a lot of my work is on understanding and measuring the patient voice, what outcomes matter to patients, how can we best capture or measure these outcomes. And I think in particular, how does focusing on patient-valued outcomes change the conversation, change treatment outcomes, both for patients and families, but also for the providers. The way I do research has changed a lot too. Our research is very participatory. We were doing a lot of focus groups and consensus meetings with broad groups of stakeholders, always in person. Being in the same room and sitting together and sharing space, sharing the same air, was very important to creating relationships and establishing trust. And that's had to shift. And some of it's been an easy shift because, well, everybody's familiar with Zoom. So it's also easier to get people together when they can just join Zoom from their own homes. But you can't do everything on Zoom. We're certainly learning because we're all Zoomed out. And participants are often less engaged. They might show up physically, but the fact that you can turn your camera off, and even the fact that we're doing this through cameras, there isn't the same level of engagement as before. So that's been a real challenge that we've had to come to terms with, and we're still grappling with.
Dr. Shepard, would you like to tell us briefly about, you did cover it, but if you wanted to add anything about your current research pursuits?
Sure. So yeah, my lab starts with doing basic biology, trying to understand the function of members of this large protein family called integrins. But because I'm a pulmonary physician, we always move quickly towards models that might inform us about the molecular mechanisms of lung disease and we try to use these approaches to develop new treatments for lung disease. And the COVID epidemic, actually, it impacted basic research somewhat less than patient-based, substantially less than patient-based research, but we did have a period of several months where everybody was working in shifts. The biggest impact on trainees, I think, has come from uncertainty about families and finances, and additional, for physician scientists, the additional clinical responsibilities that people took on. So I think we're going to see a significant impact on that from those factors for quite a while. Still, we don't know, when schools will be completely reopened and how people are going to deal with childcare responsibilities, for example, next year. One of the things that I have to say was extremely helpful for one of my mentees was the extension of the K99 deadlines, because I had a postdoc who wouldn't have qualified, except he got an extension and he now was just funded on a K99. So thanks to Rowe and the NHLBI for those efforts. I think, one of the things that we've tried to do is, I'll come up a little bit later in the discussion, is to help all of us to set our expectations differently so that people understand that everybody's been going through a difficult time and things have been slowed down, and we all have to be supportive of each other and realistic about what can be accomplished. So I'll stop there.
Dr. Brian Rowe, would you like to add anything?
Thanks very much. I'm always happy when the panel members are supportive of the Edmonton Oilers. That's always a good thing for me. And Susan, it's great that you're supportive of the Oilers, even though you don't live here. That's fantastic. Anyway, as Sana said, I'm a clinician scientist in the emergency department. So I'm the only fraud on the panel. I'm not a pulmonologist, and I'm not a sleep scientist, but I participate in research with that group, particularly as a clinician in the emergency department. We can collect samples for our basic scientist colleagues. We participate in research with clinicians and health services researchers, and we work in the space of prevention, for example, in smoking, vaping, and other health-related issues with air quality. So we have a broad spectrum of interest and participation. Our own research has been significantly impacted by the pandemic. First, because most of my day is spent in front of a Zoom call working for CIHR to try to find solutions for young scientists and trainees in the health research ecosystem, but also because we were sent home. We didn't have a COVID research program before COVID. We have started to do some research collaboratively in the COVID space with the National Initiative in Emergency Medicine. And we continue to collect samples for other research projects that haven't been requiring us to be in place, but many of our staff are not able to return to work. The university has been very conservative, and we've been very concerned about whether it's safe for them to come back. It's easy for me as a clinician with full PPE. I now have a pair of glasses I never had before that cover my entire face. I wear a mask everywhere, and I'm in a gown and gloves, but it's very different for the staff who are working to support research. So their mental health and wellness is a key component and something that we haven't mentioned, but serious consideration. So it's we've tried to do. We're not as good at the social media aspect, but we do a lot of Zoom calls. We try to make it a non-confrontational environment so that students can express their concerns, and our staff who are collecting data and doing the research are also engaged. And it's I think it's worked to a certain degree, but it's not the same as in person. And obviously we're looking forward to the resumption of regular activity sometime in the future.
Thank you for those responses. So some of you have touched on this already, but the next question that we had was, how have the funding agencies worked with you to overcome funding related delays? And I can ask Dr. Dean Shepard to start here if there's anything he wanted to say to that question.
So I think that was actually pretty nicely covered by Roya, because the funding agency we mostly deal with is NHLBI. And so NHLBI has been very helpful in extending training grants. So we've had 2 people on my the T32 that I run who had extensions. I had a postdoc in my lab who was one of them. We've had several F32 grants extended, and we're just getting started on the applications for the K extensions. And I mentioned the K99 that was funded. So the NHLBI has been great and very, very flexible. People just have to recognize that these resources are out there and reach out. I think the bigger challenge is going to be coming down the line, when people have to deal with the tail of the decrease in productivity that's come as a result of the pandemic.
Great, thank you. Dr. Brian Rowe, would you like to add anything to how the funding agencies at your end have worked with you to overcome funding related delays?
Well, they've been amazing because actually I'm one of the funding agencies, and I'm just complimenting myself. But you heard from NIH. Canada has had a very similar response. Clearly, young investigators in their training programs and early career investigators are critical to the future of science in our country as in the United States and other countries. And we've been putting forward platforms and programs to try to help people, at least in the short term. It's never enough, and we know that there are going to be some people falling through the cracks. But a couple of things that I think really have come to the forefront are the issues faced by women scientists, and by the focus on BIPOC and Indigenous researchers. So we've done a couple of things at CIHR which I think are worth talking about. First of all, we never did virtual peer review. We said it couldn't be done. We didn't have the platform, and immediately we had to switch to it. We've now done a number of medical countermeasure responses that have been done by virtual peer review. Our major project scheme, which is in the fall and the spring, every year has resumed, and we have done it 3 successive times in virtual media, and it's worked. We've also provided compensation for dependent care, which we've never done before. And that's not just child care, that's elder care and family with differing abilities. And that has provided an opportunity for those scientists and junior staff to participate in peer review, particularly so that their phone and internet costs are covered. They can, some have had to use hotel rooms, but we've been very flexible to try to engage early career investigators and trainees in this process. We've resumed all of our strategic funding, which obviously is the key for science in Canada, but we've also provided some extensions for early career investigators and clinician scientists. We've provided a massive amount of support for research trainees to the universities and research staff at the health research institutions. And then we've extended opportunities to get unofficial transcripts, to get renewed information about how the pandemic has affected people's research careers, so that we can at least provide opportunities for concessions in the funding programs. We've also started to collect more information on EDI, and that information sometimes is controversial, but it's now becoming standardized so that we can address the equity issues in research. So there have been a number of things. Obviously, the pandemic has exposed many inequities in the research ecosystem, and we're working hard to try to rectify those.
Thank you. And Dr. Susan Bartlett, you are at a Canadian institution. So can you, as a follow-up, would you like to add anything to how funding agencies have worked with your team?
I think that Brian has really done a lovely job of outlaying just the wide-ranging efforts that CIHR and others have taken, our provincial funders as well, to try and really support research and researchers as best they can. And the flexibility has just been life-saving for so many. One area that I have seen a huge drop-off on is philanthropy and health charities. And these organizations are so essential to early career investigators because they often provide them with the seed money for pilot work. And that's what's fallen through the floor right now. And that's one of the things I'm really concerned about. That and the fact that we are paying more attention than ever to EDI in Canada, in the United States, and elsewhere. But that said, there were some people who could, early career investigators, who could pivot quite readily when COVID came along. My daughter is one of them. She's doing a PhD in pharmacoepi, and she switched her dissertation topic immediately to COVID and has been incredibly successful in making that shift. But there are so many others who just simply can't because of the nature of the work that they're doing. It's not a reflection of them. It's not a reflection of their skills. But what I'm really worried about is the effect long-term that the pandemic is going to have on these individuals, because it's going to be harder, I think, for them to appear as competitive simply by virtue of being caught in circumstances over which they've really had no control.
Great, thank you. And so Dr. Brian Rowe, you've spoken within the capacity of CIHR helping, early career scientists. At your institution, however, or in your own team with trainees, what strategies that are new have been implemented to kind of cater for the fact that a lot of the young investigators are impacted by COVID for personal or professional reasons?
Yeah, that's a great point. I would just like to comment a bit on what Susan said. We've been spending a lot of time with the charitable sector and NAFRA, which is the provincial funding organizations. It'd be like the state funding organizations in the US. And, many of them have been decimated. And as Susan indicated, the health research ecosystem has really very intricate. These charities and societies provide seed money, early career investigator awards. They collaborate with other groups, and they've been unable to raise funds and support research. And of course, some people in their sector have lost jobs, and I think what we've found from our discussions with these groups is that we clearly need to work together more frequently, and we need to know what each other are planning, so that if there's something synergistic, we can put our heads together and our wallets together and build a better program moving forward. One of the things that we have done is we've continued to support the trainee and mentorship programs for society. So for example, the Canadian Thoracic Society, the Canadian Lung Association, and the Canadian Respiratory Research Network and ICRH have continued to support the Renaissance training program at the annual meeting. We do the same thing in sleep. We do the same thing in other domains within our mandate area. So those are very important, and we've actually been able to increase the EDI component there. We've given many more opportunities to discuss career opportunities, because we know not everybody doing a master's or PhD is going to end up in the academic world. So we need to provide the opportunities. It's not like we're chasing them away, but we're providing the opportunities for people to look at industry, to look at the public sector. CIHR is full of academics who are contributing in other ways to the ecosystem. So those kinds of things have been the kinds of things that we've done at ICRH. Within our own group, we've done journal clubs online. We've done we haven't done any evening sessions, but we've tried to keep people engaged, and I think that's been successful. We've watched for mental health and wellness issues, and we've focused a lot on catching up. So one of the silver linings of the pandemic would be a little bit more time to write up the things that you've been working on. And that's been shown in other areas. And so we do systematic reviews, we do database work, and there's opportunities to write those things up, get them published so that people are still productive without collecting new data. And that's what, some of the things that we've tried. We're lucky because we have that collection of information that we can use to write papers. It's not always the case for other groups.
So, Dr. Susan Bartlett, would you want to add anything for strategies that were, adopted by your institution or your lab during COVID?
I think it's fair to say that most institutions have done this, but it makes such a difference. We have put a pause on the tenure clock for our young faculty. We did something simple, but really, really important in our institution. We delayed the annual evaluation, which has always taken historically quite a bit of time, both at the individual's level and at the departmental level. And everyone just kind of got a pass on this year in recognition of the circumstances that everybody was dealing with. So, the ability, our institution, McGill, is 200 years old this year. And some of our policies were actually set in stone by the individual who gave the money to found the university. So there are some interesting quirks that we need to follow. But in every place that they can, I think the institution has worked very hard, and other institutions have, as I've heard time and time again, to be as flexible as possible and to change the rules. And you know what? We found that it's good to be nimble.
Thank you for that. Dr. Dean Shepard, would you like to add anything to the discussion?
Sure. So we've been pretty lucky in that we've had some financial resources that have allowed us to make some to do some things that impacted people positively at our institution. So we had a grateful patient who donated $100,000 that we used to support excess child care costs for our senior trainees and junior faculty. And then we have a fairly large endowment in the pulmonary division. And this year we directed all of the flexible income from that endowment towards COVID-related costs. So we just invited senior fellows and junior faculty to write in proposals for what would help them in any way that it could be helpful, and funded $500,000 worth of COVID-related support through that mechanism. And then we've really doubled down on advocating for change in the appointment promotion processes to take into consideration the different circumstances that people have been going through. But also, I think that this will have a long-term benefit in taking a more holistic approach to the process of appointment and promotions. So that's one silver lining, actually, I see from the pandemic, is that this flexibility that we've had to have hopefully will allow us to get out of some of the rigid rules that we've been following that don't really make that much sense.
Great, thank you all. That's very insightful. Rachel, are there any comments you'd like to share from the chat or?
Yeah, I wanted to share a conversation and let Dr. Kalantari comment any further. And then there's an additional question for the panelists. So first, the conversation that's been going on in the chat, is there a plan to include people from international backgrounds to be able to apply for training grants? Dr. Kalantari said the K99R00 mechanism does not have citizenship requirements, so it's an excellent pathway for applicants from international backgrounds. And then the question after that was, well, eligibility is 4 years after your terminal degree. Many international postdocs miss out on grants like T32 or F32s that could pave their way into an academic career. And as a follow-up question, there's a question, does NIH, NHLBI offer any funding opportunities to researchers at overseas institutions? And it sounds like not that we know of at foreign institutions currently, but Fogarty is a great resource at the NIH for foreign funding. Dr. Kalantari put the link in here for that. But I just wanted to give Dr. Kalantari a moment to respond to any of that or to comment further.
Yeah, I guess it's a little challenging for us to support foreign funding. So it's just a little tough for us as a government institution. So we do what we can in the spaces that we have, but foreign collaborations are a lot easier for us to support. So if you can find a collaborator at the US to work with and to have them apply and work through that, it's much easier for us to support that kind of work.
Thank you. We have two questions for our panelists, so I'll start out with the first. We're curious if the panelists think that greater involvement of physician scientists on case study sections could help increase funding of DO or MD investigators, CDAs, and if so, how ATS might promote such involvement. So we'll open it up to our panel. Anyone who wants to jump in.
I'm not totally understanding the question. I mean, for the K review committees are mostly physician scientists.
I wonder if early career.
I see.
Maybe.
Yeah, that's actually a really good idea. I mean, we should take this up with funding agency leaders. So at the NHLBI, there are some junior investigators who are invited to participate in, as ad hoc reviewers on panels, but it's very hard for junior investigators to be regular members of panels. I think it's actually a really good idea to try to change that up a little bit.
This is Brian Rowe again. CIHR has implemented a strategy of having trainees as participants on the panels and having them mentored. And in my experience as a scientist early on, for some reason I got invited to a panel early in my career, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me. It was a lot of work, and we didn't have it electronically. We got these huge binders of applications that we had to read and review, write reports on, and then send them back to Ottawa when we went back to the panel meeting. It was the craziest thing. But anyway, it was a fantastic experience. It gave you an insight into what actually happened at the panels, gave you experience evaluating, and improved your own grants. And I think it's been a great opportunity for young people in their training. The problem is that we don't have enough spaces for it. And so we're oversubscribed on an annual basis. And so in our training and mentorship platforms, we're doing mock peer reviews for trainees to show them exactly what happens, what the scoring system is, and how things get triaged. And I think it's been a really enlightening opportunity for them, because not everybody's going to get a chance to be on the panel.
And Roya pointed out that I was unaware of something. She wrote into the, Vaishnavi wrote into the chat, and Roya did, the contact for the NIH Early Career Reviewer Program that allows people to apply to participate in the review process. It just provides one cycle of participation, and that's because there are too many people subscribing, just as Brian was describing for Canada. But it is a exciting program that people can apply for.
Yeah, it does. It gives you, I think, you're only a reviewer on 3 applications and you're the 3rd reviewer. So it's kind of some pressure off of you just to give you the experience, give you the opportunity, see what it's like. But I'm definitely not an expert on that. That's the review side of things. I'm on the program side, but I know it exists and I know people who have participated have enjoyed it.
I just add that everything that I've learned about how to write a good grant has come from my experience on study sections. I was there from the earliest days. I was terrified the first times that I was on, just observing the process and then giving comments. But I still consider it my continuing education, and I remain active in the review process, because there's not a review committee that I attend that I don't learn. So it's just a marvelous experience. And if you're going to be seeking funding, you really do want to do everything you can to get exposure to the process, so you really understand it.
Susan, you're still a little bit terrified still, right?
Well, less so. I think now I might be a little opinionated.
Also, I think that the for case dollars, just as Canada, the Canadian research funding mechanisms hold mock committees, so does the NIH. I don't know if Roya, you know more about that than I do, but at least they have one that's more focused for K-12, so more the basic scientists, and then they have every other year they have one that's more K-23, so more the clinical researcher. And I've heard nothing but good things about going to those events, although I'm sure hopefully they'll be held virtually now.
Yeah, NHLBI also has an annual K to R meeting for our K awardees, where we host, we have a mock study section that we have in there. We didn't have the meeting last year because of COVID, and it just was too hard to put together, but spoilers, we are having one this year.
Yeah.
So the official invitation hasn't gone out yet, but we are putting one together, and we're planning on having some mock study sections there for people to be able to watch and participate in.
That's great. I wanted to move on to another question in the chat. Thank you all for bringing up the inequities in research and the disproportionate effect on women and those underrepresented in medicine and science, even more clear during the pandemic. Does anyone have any additional advice regarding supporting these groups going forward?
Well, CIHR has a unique approach to Indigenous health research. So about 4.6% of the Canadian population is Indigenous, and that includes First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, and blended groups within that. And they have an iterative review process. So if the idea is good and they need some assistance, there's a series of feedback mechanisms to improve the grant, to bring it up to a fundable range. We are, as I said, collecting EDI data moving forward using standardized questionnaires. We're hoping that in that way we can balance the funding. So for example, we try to balance ECI applications with success. And so that if 20% of the grant applicants are ECI, we want to see 20% of the funding awarded to that group. We do the same thing with women in science, and we are looking at French language and other EDI issues. So in Canada, as a bilingual country, some applicants are in French language, and we try to balance the application pressure with the success, given that we still have to fund the best science. So those are some of the things that we're doing. It's not perfect, and it's going to likely improve, but particularly for early career and female scientists, this has made a huge difference. In the pandemic, we were criticized for rushing the first medical countermeasure opportunity, which was announced and awarded or reviewed 4 weeks later. So we extended that because the criticism was it was unfair to people who had childcare, elder care, and disability care responsibilities. And so that, again, in the second round, we had a better balance of application pressure and success.
I think it's fair to say that the challenges that existed before the pandemic are certainly still there, with new ones layered on top of this. And the people who were disproportionately affected before the pandemic are even more so now. And this is, I think, one of the things that we really need to pay very close attention to moving forward, to make sure that we can identify strategies to help mitigate the disproportionate impact. Everybody has been affected by COVID, but some people have been affected so much more. And it's so heterogeneous, the ways in which they have been affected as well.
Yeah, thank you. Luke, do you want to, just because of the time, do you want to take either the next question or take it from here?
Yeah, I'll take just briefly the next question, and then we can move to the closing thoughts. So we spent a fair bit of time talking about the resources that are available to early stage investigators, but we wanted to just briefly ask what advice you would have for early career investigators who are impacted by COVID. And this is open to any of the panelists or speakers.
I would say that one of the things that I talk with my trainees about the most is how essential it is to keep boundaries. If there's one thing that has really fallen by the wayside, it is boundaries between work and home life. Spatial boundaries, temporal boundaries, all of these things have blurred to the point, I think, that we're forgetting why it's so important that they are there. The creep is inexorable. The number of meetings now, presentations, groups that one is expected to attend in the evenings and on the weekends is just staggering, and it seems to just increase moving forward. It's something that we fought hard against 3 decades ago, I know. As a young woman in science, it was very daunting to have to deal with all of the meetings that were scheduled at the end of the day, when I also needed to be rushing to daycare to pick up my kids. I think that we've got to be thinking about the boundaries and get them back in place better so, because young mothers in particular have been so disadvantaged by the way the pandemic has played out.
Yeah, I really agree with what Susan's saying, and I think this was already obviously a major problem for many years before the pandemic, and the ease of electronic communication and Zoom can exacerbate this to a large extent. So it's something we really have to be paying attention to. I also think that one of the questions that you had in the original written document is an area that's really important to focus on, which is to help people while they're setting boundaries to set realistic expectations and recognize that the reason why they're doing what they're doing is because they love it. And the thing that keeps people in science and in academics is joy from the process. And so anything that we do, including layering on anxiety about lost time and unreasonable expectations, makes the job less fun and exciting, and that's what drives people out of science. So the people that we're training are so skilled and have gone through so much to prepare themselves for where they're at, but that puts them in a position where they should be able to pick an opportunity to do something that they'll love, that they'll really enjoy all the time that they're doing. And I think it's easy, especially when we're not in contact with one another, to forget about that. I think that's probably the most important message that we have to send people, that just keep track of what makes this so much fun and so exciting, and allow things to slide a little bit. Don't expect that you're going to be a super person and get all these things done. Everybody's negatively impacted, and if what you're doing is a grind and it's not exciting and fun, you're not going to stay in it for the long run.
I would agree with both Susan and Dean. I think it really depends on the individual. So some people have actually done better during the pandemic.
Yes.
And some people have done much worse. So we need to be aware of each person's circumstance. And so if someone's got childcare responsibilities, as we have several people in our group, we allow them that time and that flexibility. They work at off hours and on weekends when their partners can help. And we don't sweat the small stuff, because this is going to be this is new for everybody. And so other groups, other students have done very well because they're in the COVID area, right? Their funding has been better, their activity's been a priority, but we need to recognize that the non-COVID work will continue in the future. And when you look at it, I would say that for young people, look at the opportunity. So for example, we didn't have virtual care prior to this time last year.
Yeah.
In fact, many funding agencies wouldn't fund it, so people didn't do it. And I remember being on a panel with a member of the lower middle income countries, and he said people would travel 3 days for a blood pressure check. He said that was ridiculous. Now we can do blood pressure checks virtually, and they don't have to come unless we need to see them for other reasons. So virtual care is an opportunity. I think the unintended consequences of the pandemic is an opportunity. If you work in sleep has been significantly impacted by COVID for a million reasons. Look at that. And so I think there are opportunities, and we've encouraged people to look for, it's not a silver lining, but an opportunity to do novel research in their field that's been impacted by COVID. It's not, you're not doing the remdesivir trial, but you're doing work that looks at the consequences of COVID. And I think that might be a way of getting people through it and making them feel more engaged.
Could I just add too that I really try to check in more with everybody, with my trainees, with my colleagues. I see their faces on Zoom and they look like they're doing fine. And when I hear them talking, it sounds like they've got it under control. But if you scratch a little bit deeper below the surface, there are a lot of people that are really struggling in ways that I've not seen before. And I think it helps all of us to just be mindful of the humanity that needs to be very much a part of this process.
Yeah, that's really well said. Thank you. So we have 2 minutes left. Is there anything anyone would like to add from both the 2 speakers and the 3 panelists in the time we have? We really appreciate you all making time for this. It was very educational, I think, and just great perspective and insight. But in the 2 minutes, if there's anything anyone would like to just say for the closeout, now is the time.
Go Oilers, go.
I just realized I'm manning our booth at ATS for the next hour. I forgot I was doing that. So in case you want to stop by and say hi and chat some more, I'll be there virtually, of course. And thank you very much for inviting me.
Okay, with that, if there's nothing else anyone would like to add, but everything that was said was I think it was really It was really good to hear, especially where you know that the care for those around you is, you know, on people's minds, and it's important. And then also realizing that there are disparities and inequalities, and that's also being addressed, as well as everything else that comes with something like a pandemic. So stay safe. We hope that you and your families continue to stay safe. Enjoy the rest of ATS, and we'll see you next year. So thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.